So Anne Hall is mother of Daniel Roque Hall, who Anne has been fighting a campaign for a long time now to save her son from being imprisoned. He has a physical disability and medical condition that when he was imprisoned got dramatically worse, and Anne's fought really hard, and SWAN is also involved in the campaign to stop him from being returned to prison. So please welcome Anne Hall.
Hello. I just want to check that you can hear me. Is that okay? Well, I'm very pleased to be here. For the first reason is because you are organising around the issue of austerity and the cuts, and there is no more important issue to be organising around, and we all know that it has devastating effects on individuals. And that's one reason I'm very glad to be here. And the second reason is, as Jane indicated, that SWAN actually did play a very valuable role in the campaign that was organised. It was called Justice for Daniel Roque Hall with my son. And I'm very grateful for that support from SWAN. Just to give you a bit of background, my son has a disease called Friedreich's ataxia. And it's a progressive neurological disease, and he is extremely disabled. And it also causes medical problems, so he has heart problems and type 1 diabetes, because that's affected by Friedreich's ataxia as well. And the background is that my son tried to import cocaine, a large quantity of cocaine, I have to say, and was stopped at Heathrow Airport, and immediately confessed his guilt, and obviously went to court. And that was never in dispute. The reasons how he ended up in that situation are complex, but which the court was understanding about, and gave him a sentence of 3 years, which is actually quite a low sentence. The judge was not inclined to send him to prison without an assurance from the prison governor that the prison could actually meet his needs, his disability and his health needs. And the judge asked the prison twice to say yes or no to whether they could meet his needs. The governor and the prison that we're talking about is Wormwood Scrubs, which is a Category B prison, and as a later judge, an appeal court judge said, has not had a good track record. So this was the prison under consideration by the CPS. After a certain period of reluctance, Wormwood Scrubs came back to the court and emphatically said it could meet his needs. So from the day that he went to prison, which was last July, I began a campaign because I knew that Daniel could not actually survive being in prison, even though he had an allocated healthcare worker. I knew that was not possible. And after 7 weeks, he did actually end up in intensive care, and then spent another 5.5 months in hospital. So that's kind of the background. When he went to prison at the beginning, I started a campaign with the help of 3 friends. It was very small, and I started it out of desperation, and I really didn't know how viable it would be as a campaign. But my experience of that campaign is that the more a campaign grows and the more organised it becomes, the more it attracts publicity. The more it attracts publicity, the more people feel that they have to get on board, whether that's your MP or the media, the wider media, and so on. I know it's a message that you all know, and it applies very much to, Sarah and Isabel Cunningham, who spoke to you earlier, whom I met actually in the course of this campaign, because when you start the campaign, you build up a network, and that is so key. So Isabel and Sarah and I met in this meeting in Kilburn, and I established, important contacts from there, and that group has been important to me as well. But from those small beginnings and setting up a petition, which feels like a meagre thing to do, especially when you're campaigning for somebody who does not attract automatic public sympathy, a prisoner and a drug smuggler. And, you know, there is also, and I encountered it quite a lot, hostility about disability. And the feeling that, well, if he could do that, he surely can't be as disabled as you know, his consultants and professors at hospitals claim that he is. But in fact, he was. But there is a reluctance to believe that. And that was a hurdle to get over. First of all, I had local support in Kilburn. Then the petition attracted a certain level of support. I'm not familiar with social media, but I think it was actually really important in the campaign because I had a friend who used Twitter for me and another who did Facebook, so I'm still not very good at social media, but I've got two friends who've learned quite a lot about it. And that attracted quite a following, particularly the Twitter, because it ended up with quite a lot of law firms and quite a lot of influential people following the Twitter site. And I think, apart from kind of social media, the print media became involved and television. And I think although television and the print media, normally there's obviously there's a big barrier to getting any real news into those channels, but particularly when it's about a prisoner. But there were people who were actually interested in doing something newsworthy for a change, even in the BBC. So I did a couple of talks on the radio, LBC, BBC Radio 4, appeared on BBC London News, and there was an article in The Guardian, Private Eye ran it, took it up as a campaigning issue, and it appeared in other press as well. So as that campaign grew, more people became involved. Apart from the petition, people wrote letters, and they just kept it in the public eye. And even if we had a vigil or a protest and it was small in numbers, it created publicity. Publicity because there was also already interest in the case, generated, you know, a higher profile in the news. So, I mean, it is something about mobilising resources and just kind of keeping it active and keeping it going. You know, whether it's, you know, occupying IDS's driveway or something else, it's just got to be there. And you find that you get across, I think, to more and more people as they're exposed to something that is real and truthful. And so, I don't know how I'm doing for time.
We've got a couple of minutes.
Okay. And one of the things that there were two other organisations that I'd like to mention. SWAN, because SWAN organised a letter that was published in The Guardian in protest about Daniel going back to prison because he was still in hospital under guard, first 3 prison guards, then 2 prison guards, and so on. So an immense waste of public resources spent on supposedly security issues around a prisoner who couldn't move, who can't scratch himself if he's got an itch. So there's all this money to waste. And it was, you know, prisoners, I'd like to say something about prisoners as well, because I had no contact with prisons or prisoners prior to this experience, and I have, visiting Wormwood Scrubs, I have to say that I have never seen a group of people in this country more cowed than the people visiting their relatives in Wormwood Scrubs, ever. And they are made to feel that way. It is appalling. And they are largely women and children who are visiting as well. And in case you don't know, health was transferred to the NHS. Health in prisons was transferred to the NHS in, I think, 2005, 2006. So the NHS actually has contracts to deliver health in prisons. Hammersmith and Fulham Community Care Trust had the contract, and it's part of a North West London and Central London Community Care Trust. Had the contract to deliver healthcare in Wormwood Scrubs, and Daniel was placed on a health wing, but he was placed on a wing of 22 beds, every other bed occupied by a person with psychiatric difficulties. It was like an acute psychiatric ward, but in a prison. When he first went to prison, Wormwood Scrubs realised they'd made a mistake and put him in a home for people with dementia. After a few days, they said, we can't look after him. He was transferred to that health wing. And this is not for some reason regarded as an abuse of human rights. It's somebody with no cognitive impairment whatsoever is placed with old people with dementia, and then on what is a psychiatric ward, although they contested that, but all their beds were for those people who were very, very distressed. And if I had to say, I have seen eventually when it went to court, the care notes, the nursing notes for Daniel that went on in that so-called healthcare facility. To call them substandard would be to flatter them. They're an absolute disgrace. Now, I have learned not to expect, well, I didn't expect much actually I've got 2 more minutes, okay, from organisations that are meant to be there to be regulating. So, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, they really did nothing in terms of investigation. Although they responded and said, oh yes, we think it's a serious case, they did nothing. Chief Inspector of Prisons wrote to me and said, well, these are very serious allegations, we will talk to Wormwood Scrubs about this. They talked to Wormwood Scrubs about it and then did nothing. They never talked to Daniel, they never talked to me. So prisoners have no voice whatsoever. So from those institutions, nothing. But from grassroots organisations, individuals and organisations that are committed to campaign, that's where I think you can make a difference. And use the other institutions when they're useful, but you can't rely on them at all. And just one final thing about prisoners is that with the changes in legal aid, prisoners will not be allowed to have legal aid. And Daniel would never, because in the end we had a good solicitor. At the beginning, not such a good one, but at the end, a good one and a good barrister. And he would not have access to legal aid. He would now die in prison pretty quickly, because if he was going to prison now, if there was no legal aid. So that is something that I'd like everybody to be aware of. But it was a successful campaign, because on February the 8th, we went to the Court of Appeal. 3 appeal court judges said he could not go back to prison. And, you know, it was a joyous day. He's at home. He has no curfew attached to him. He can actually have the kind of care that he needs in what remains of his life. And although there was no institutional criticism of the prison, everybody in that courtroom, including the appeal court judges, were perfectly well aware that Daniel nearly died because of Wormwood Scrubs. And without the campaign that was organised around him, he would be just another prisoner who died in prison and nobody would know anything about him. So that's all I want to say, really. And I know it's Sarah and Lizzie said about I think you did at some point about not being isolated. That is so key to the person going through the experience and so key to success as well. So thank you very much.